I was like, first off, how do you have the funds to sustain this lifestyle? This doesn't make sense. Like this.
All right, guys, we have a lot to get through, so let's go ahead and get started. I have your exams here, so at the end of class, you can come up and grab it. I have them organized by lab section. So today we are gonna switch gears a little bit and talk about the immune system. And, you know, we've talked a lot about microbes, but what happens when these microbes cause infection, you know, and so how does our immune system protect us? And there's two types of immunity. There's innate immunity and adaptive immunity, and so we'll talk a little bit about those. This is not an immunology class, so you will not need to know all of the details, but I do want to introduce you guys to some of these concepts. I am going to be teaching immunology next year, this semester, spring, so if this interests you, keep that in mind. So you'll get a little introduction into what that might look like. Okay. So the immune system is your body's security system, essentially. And so there are different types of protective barriers. So we have obviously physical barriers. Our skin is a barrier that keeps things from entering our body. But things also like tears. Tears are a barrier to make sure that things don't get into our eyes, and they help to expel things from our eyes. Chemical barriers include tears, stomach acid, even earwax, mucus, even the tiny hairs in your nose are a barrier. That's why if something is going to enter your nose, or if there's like dust or anything in your nose, you get itchy, and so that's because those tiny hairs are, you know, coming in contact with that. Your eyelashes are a barrier. Physical barrier as well, and they protect from things getting into your eyes. So your body's first security system is these physical and chemical barriers on the outside. Like I said, there's innate defenses and adaptive defenses. So innate, if you think of the word, what innate means something that is, you know, natural or native. And so innate defenses include inflammation or swelling at a site of, say, infection. There are chemical signals as well. Within our innate defenses, there are white blood cells. So those white blood cells are the ones that help, you know, protect you against infection. If you have an infection and you go and you do a CBC, a complete blood count at the doctor's office, and they say that you have a high white blood cell count, that means that your white blood cells are being recruited because there is some type of infection in the body. So a high white blood cell count is indicative of some sort of infection. The innate defense system is a generalized response to all threats. So I like to think of this as dialing 911 to alert the SWAT team about the invader. So it's kind of the body's first line of defense against some sort of threat. The adaptive immune response basically requires those body's defenses to adapt to the threat. So it's a little bit more of a delayed response because the response is tailored to the threat. And the cells that you guys should know, and we'll talk about this more, that are involved in the adaptive immune response are T cells and B cells. B cells make antibodies, we'll talk about that. And the adaptive immune response also helps to make the cells that are involved in memory responses. So if you have an infection and then you get it again, there are already those antibodies that are made. There are memory cells in your body that are going to be there because you've had exposure to that pathogen or that threat before. So the adaptive response is the SWAT team actually going in and trying to clear the threat. Questions so far? Okay, so just another quick overview. The innate immunity is pretty immediate. It's the first line of defense. It's ancient, it's evolved since early invertebrates were on Earth, and this consists of the anatomic and physical barriers, chemical barriers, and then those non-specific cellular defenses. They're non-specific because they are generalized. Remember, they're kind of just there, dialing 911, you get, some sort of threat and you know exactly what to do. The innate immune system is present at birth. The adaptive immunity is slower to respond, and it's something that develops over time as you grow up over time after birth. So adaptive immunity includes reacting to specific structures that we call antigens. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But in order for this response to be launched, the body has to detect that particular antigen. Antigens are small molecules on, say, bacterial cells that tell the body's immune system that there's a bacteria that is trying to invade. So you pick up the antigen on the bacteria, and then you can respond to the threat. So innate immunity is nonspecific, whereas adaptive immunity does react to specific structures. Okay, so a couple of terms. An infection and infectious disease are not the same thing. An infection is when an organism invades the body's tissues by some disease-causing agent, and that disease-causing agent can multiply or persist, and so it's that reaction of the host to that infectious agent that makes it an infection. So it's not an infection if it's just crossed the barrier and it's just sitting there and your body's okay. Your body has to basically respond and react to that agent in order for it to be labeled an infection. So one of those ways is your body's inflammatory response, or your body's response when you have basically an infection and you get inflammation at that site. The pain response as well, that's your body recognizing there's an infection and it's reacting to it. It doesn't always result in an infectious disease. Infectious diseases are the disease that results from the infection. The disease, when we call it a disease, we're kind of talking about it in the context of it being able to be passed from host to host. So it's transmissible at this point for it to be a disease. So when we talk about infection, we're talking about the host's response to that infectious agent. And when we talk about the infectious disease, we're talking about its transmission from person to person or host to host. So in other words, all infectious diseases are infections, but not all infections are infectious diseases. Does that make sense? A little bit of sense. Okay, so what causes infections? Obviously, we know microbes do. Microbes can be bacteria, viruses, even fungi. Parasites also, worms, helminths, protozoa. So there's obviously various models of entry into the body and methods of infection. You can ingest it, it can be carried by a vector organism, it could be that you've scraped your knee and now you've broken the skin barrier, and so now you can expose that site to things basically entering the body. We're going to talk about two types of infections, extracellular versus intracellular. So extracellular, outside of the cell, intracellular, inside of the cell. Extracellular infections, the pathogen can live in the body, but outside of those cells. So it can be in the interstitial space, which is the space between the blood vessels and the cells. So it helps provide that fluid and structural environment that surround those cells. Extracellular infections could be in the blood, in your lymph nodes, on the epithelial surfaces, so not directly in the cell. Whereas intracellular infections, the pathogen lives inside the cell and it reproduces within the cell. So that could be inside of the cytoplasm of the cell or in vesicles. And this chart gives you some examples of different organisms. You guys don't have to remember any of this, but you should know where extracellular infections are found and where intracellular infections are found. So you don't need to know the organisms. Any questions so far? So once again, an infectious agent entering the body does not mean that it's going to cause disease. So the first step for an infection to occur is that the organism has to breach that anatomic and chemical barrier to gain entry. So if there's a pathogen and it tries to get in, but there's an anatomic barrier, so it's contained, then it fails to do the infection. It prevents the infection. Once it is able to breach that first structural barrier, like your skin, then it has to survive the innate defenses. And then if it can survive the innate immune system, then it also has to survive and overcome the adaptive immune response, and that's when it can become a disease. So it's got to really go through these three checkpoints in order for it to cause disease. So just reminding you a little bit about some of these anatomic and chemical barriers. There are cilia and hairs and things that basically help to expel particles. There's lysozyme, it's an enzyme in tears that's secreted. So your tears aren't just water, and they're not just there for no reason. There's definitely many reasons for it. Skin obviously is a physical barrier. Your mucus, the cilia that are lining your trachea. So even in your trachea, there are cilia. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about the lung microbiome. When you cough, that's your body's reaction to something and you're trying to expel it. Same with sneezing. So those are passive barriers to infection. Just some more examples of things. Your stomach acidity, the normal microbiota can compete with pathogens. What did we call that mechanism again? The mechanism by which by which normal microbiota can compete with pathogens and help keep them at low numbers so that they don't overgrow or invade. Louder. Colonization resistance or competitive exclusion. Yep. Yeah, you guys should know this. Mucus, antibacterial peptides, phagocytes. We talked a little bit about phagocytes in the lungs. Those are innate immune cells that engulf pathogens. Blood and lymph proteins, the pH obviously in the stomach, and that change in the pH from the stomach to the small intestine. Yeah, here's some more. Epithelial cells, flushing of the urinary tract. So just kind of giving you all of these different barriers examples. Another anatomic barrier are those epithelial cells. We talked about that a lot in the context of colonization resistance. You have the mucus layer on top that's protecting it, and you have the commensal organisms that are protecting from pathogen exposure. And so that epithelial barrier has to be breached in order for that infection to make its way down. So, you know, aside from your skin, you actually also have the mucosal epithelium. And there are specialized cells that secrete mucus and make sure that there's mucus in good quantities to protect from things reaching the barrier, the epithelial cells. So there are also these tight junctions that kind of stitch each epithelial cell to the next epithelial cell to keep that epithelial barrier really tight. So if an organism tries to come in and breach this and split this apart, these tight junctions are at work in keeping it pretty intact. So how's the body protected from invasion by microbes? This is in the context of the gut. So basically, we talked a little bit about Peyer's patches in the small intestine. So the reason why I have this here is because this is a picture of the small intestine. But basically, if you have, this is the epithelial cells, if you have a microbe that basically has antigen, so this could be an antigen or the bacteria, they can be taken up by cells. So if they're able to breach that barrier, then there's the immune system right below that can immediately recruit, be recruited to that site and then start to engulf those antigens or those bacteria. So that's just a very general picture, but I will describe this mechanism a little bit more. And just once again, Peyer's patches are a group of well-organized cells in this area, the lamina propria. So it's just how they're organized in the small intestine particularly. So we talked about epithelial cells, but different epithelial cells, there are different specialized epithelial cells. And so one of those are M cells, and M cells in particular basically feed antigens to the macrophages once the bacteria are in that Peyer's patch area. So that's the direct mechanism there. And so some terms for you. So that specialized epithelial cell is in the Peyer's patch is the M cell. Lymphocytes, I'm gonna introduce a lot of new terms. So lymphocytes, think, lymphatic systems, think the bloodstream. So that is going to be where you're gonna find your white blood cells, where you're gonna find your T cells, your B cells. Macrophages are really important in innate immunity. They are phagocytic, which means that they are able to engulf the bacteria or the antigen and kind of engulf it and trap it, and then it takes it to the adaptive immune system and says, here, it presents it and says, here, this is the thing that you need to make antibodies against and kill. So it's kind of that intermediate that helps to engulf the pathogen. It can either break it down itself, or it can take it to the T and B cells, which are part of the adaptive immune system, to have them do their job. Okay, so just some more on chemical barriers. Enzymes that are in your tears, those lysozyme that I talked about, that help destroy bacteria. And there's phospholipase, another enzyme in tears. Acidic pH in the stomach, that has digestive enzymes, bile salts, fatty acids. And then there are antimicrobial peptides that are produced by both the epithelial cells. They can be produced by the commensal bacteria. So this, helps keep things under wraps. Paneth cells are other specialized epithelial cells. So we talked about the M cells, there's Paneth cells, there's goblet cells, there's different ones. And so Paneth cells just have a lot of antimicrobial peptides in there. So there's a lot at work within the anatomical barriers. There's chemical barriers as well that help to kind of make sure that things don't cross that barrier. Antimicrobial peptides, they're really important. We've talked about them a little bit, but this is an actual, true definition. They are small peptides with potent antimicrobial activities, and they're produced by many cells in the body. This includes neutrophils. Neutrophils are white blood cells. So, they can be produced by the immune cells in the body, but they can also be produced by the Paneth cells or just epithelial cells in the body. They can also be produced by bacteria. So they're produced by many different types of cells, but the goal is that they have a direct and rapid antimicrobial activity that will essentially disrupt the bacterial membrane and, target it so it doesn't cause more harm. Okay, any questions? This is getting me excited to teach immunology next year. Okay, so these are some categories, some examples of natural antimicrobial peptides, just for you guys to get, an example, but you don't have to memorize any of this. Just an FYI for you that these also occur in other species, not just humans, and that's because it's an evolutionarily conserved innate host defense. So once again, you'll see AMPs, antimicrobial peptides. They're right here, they're right here. So here the Paneth cells is secreting them. Over here as well, they're just, floating around. And so they're protective. So just an idea of what's going on. So if this is your epithelial barrier, this is the mucus layer. So this is the small intestine, remember, there's one mucus layer. In the colon, there's two mucus layers, right? And so we have the Paneth cells, there's goblet cells. Goblet cells produce mucus. And then underneath, over here, there's your macrophages, your dendritic cells. And so these are part of the innate immune system. So a quick summary of the these passive barriers to infection, just a list of them you guys can go over. Passive barriers can be physical, chemical, and anatomical. So, where can we find immune cells? This is not a hypothetical question. Where can we find immune cells? Yeah. In our blood, yeah. So in our blood, when we withdraw blood and put it in a tube, you centrifuge it, which means you spin it down. And so by centrifuging or spinning it down really, really fast, it separates the blood from the plasma. So there's plasma in the blood, and that plasma is, really, it contains 55% of the whole blood. It's not very dense. There's this small buffy coat in the middle right there. In your blood, there's leukocytes and platelets and things like that. A lot of your immune cells are in that plasma. But essentially in your blood is where you find immune cells. This is just an image, a microscopy image that's showing, white blood cells and red blood cells. They're not stained, so it's hard to really distinguish, but white blood cells are slightly red tinged from hemoglobin. There's one here that kind of has a weird morphology, which is also normal. So red blood cells that have weird shapes, weird morphologies, are actually cleared through the spleen. So every time I do blood work, I don't have a spleen, so they're always like, oh my god, you have these weird looking red blood cells, and I'm like, yeah, it's because I don't have a spleen and they're not getting filtered out. So it's actually pretty interesting to see. I should draw my own blood one day and look at it under the microscope and see. Okay, so when you hear the term leukocytes, we're talking about white blood cells. Neutrophils, or polymorphonuclear neutrophils, PMNs, is another term you might see it as, but those are just neutrophils. Eosinophils, there are monocytes, and lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are the B and the T cells. There's some differences in their structures, which I'm not going to have you guys remember. Lymphocytes are especially occurring in the lymphatic system. Neutrophils are the most abundant innate immune cells. Just introducing you to some of these terms. You should know that neutrophils are part of the innate immune system, and you should know that lymphocytes are part of the adaptive immune system, the B and the T cells. We have this whole circulatory system, which is the arteries, veins, and capillaries that also, contribute to these immune cells as well. So these immune cells are in our blood. Well, how are they produced? Hematopoiesis. This is the blood cell production process. All cells in the blood are derived from the bone marrow. And they start off as stem cells in the bone marrow. And here you'll see it says pluripotent hematopoietic stem cell. Pluripotent means that it has the potential to become many different types of cells, or one of many different types of cells. So it all starts in the bone marrow. Then you have essentially two categories: the common lymphoid progenitors and the myeloid progenitors. what you guys need to know is that the myeloid progenitor basically makes these neutrophils, eosinophils, all of these innate immune cells that can then become macrophages, dendritic cells, mast cells. So this is all innate immunity. We're going to ignore this right here. And then the common lymphoid progenitor makes the B cells and T cells, and then some others that you guys don't have to know. But the adaptive immune system. Those B cells can then become an effector cell called a plasma cell, which contains memory, also antibodies, makes antibodies. T cells can then become further activated. So again, lymphocytes are B cells and T cells. So the common lymphoid progenitor, the key here is this term lymphoid, is going to give rise to the adaptive immune cells, B cells and T cells. So that's how you should remember it. Myeloid progenitors will give rise to these granulocytes, which just means that they are these different types of monocytes with granules inside. So these will become mast cells, macrophages, dendritic cells. Macrophages, remember, are the ones that engulf pathogens. They're phagocytic. And this is the adaptive immune response. So I'm kind of going over it over and over again because I really want you guys to try to remember this. So another way to look at this, just another family tree. Everything starts in the bone marrow. Hematopoietic stem cells are the precursors, and then they can differentiate into either the myeloid progenitors, here it's called myeloid stem cell, or the lymphoid stem cell. Remember, lymph is referring to adaptive immunity, so the T cells and the B cells. And they're called T cells because they're processed in the thymus. B cells are processed in the bone marrow. So here, the myeloid stem cells can become mast cells, or they can become neutrophils, other phils, and then macrophages or dendritic cells. Any questions so far? Okay, so leukocytes basically form by differentiation of those hematopoietic stem cells, and there's those two main lineages, the myeloid, which is the innate, and the lymphoid, which is the adaptive. Leukocytes kind of encompasses as a generalized term for just all of these different types of cells. Among the innate immune cells, we have these PMNs, or granulocytes, because they have granules. So those are neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, things that end in phil. But like I said, they could be macrophages, dendritic cells, monocytes, mast cells, NK cells, natural killer cells. So just a list that you guys should know. And here is some of the structure. So, like I said previously, a macrophage can engulf something, and then it can basically present it to the adaptive immune system and say, hey, like, I trapped this, so here, you should do something with it. So they're a bridge between the innate and adaptive immune system. Well, dendritic cells also can do the same thing. They can also take up antigens and present it to T cells and B cells. And if you think of a dendrite, it basically is something that connects one aspect of the body to another. So that's part of why it's called a dendritic cell. So it's a very fair question for me to ask you, which two types of innate immune cells can present antigens to other cells or the adaptive immune response? And you should know that it's macrophages and dendritic cells. Is that clear? Phagocytosis is this process of engulfing a microbe via the extrusion of pseudopods. So they attach the pathogen and pull it in, and once it's engulfed, it's called a phagosome. So if you start up here you have this phagocytic cell. So an example is the macrophage. You have a bacteria, and it has an adherence component that allows it to adhere. And so once it kind of touches this, the phagocyte kind of extends itself and engulfs it. And then it causes this invagination that traps it, and it forms a phagosome. And then there are lysosomes. So if you guys remember, you probably should know this, that lysosomes are enzymes that, or have enzymes that degrade things and break things down. So here we have lysosomes that can then fuse with the phagosome and produce these enzymes, and this is called a phagolysosome now. And so now these can basically break down this molecule, this bacterial antigens, destroy the microbe, and then release the microbial debris. So a phagocytic cell can do this whole process itself, or it can trap it and then present it to a T or a B cell. Cells with phagocytic capabilities, we talked about macrophages, but monocytes, neutrophils, and dendritic cells have this ability as well. But the two that can present antigens to the adaptive immune response are which two? Yeah.
Dendritic cells.
Yes, dendritic cells and macrophages. These two are antigen-presenting cells, but all of these have phagocytic capabilities. So I want you guys to get in the habit of kind of knowing what these terms mean. Primarily, phagocytosis is carried out by macrophages and neutrophils. There's a video where a phagocyte is attaching to the microbe. This can be mediated by different things, receptor specific interactions or charges, but let's look at this. So here you have the immune cell, and here you have the bacterial antigens. And so this is a neutrophil, and it takes it in right there, kind of does this thing, it realizes there's more, and it goes to get the rest of it. So it's a cool movie video of this. So how does phagocytosis kill those microbes that it's ingested? Well, like I said, there are lysosomes that have enzymes, and so those basically produce these reactive oxygen species or reactive oxygen radicals that degrade the microbe, and there are also other degradative enzymes. You guys don't have to know, the mechanism or anything here, but you should know that there are lysosomes that produce these reactive oxygen radicals that are able to digest the microbe and degrade it. This is kind of a general theme of how phagocytosis works. More specifically, neutrophils throw these nets, literally like a net. It's called a neutrophil extracellular trap. And basically it's a lattice work of DNA that has antimicrobial compounds, and the neutrophil kind of throws it over the pathogen and it traps it and it prevents it from spreading, and those antimicrobial compounds will kill the microbe. There are certain types of pathogens that have evaded this mechanism or escaped this mechanism. So just a general, I just want to kind of go through some of these other innate immune cells and tell you about what they are involved in. Basophils are involved in promoting allergic responses and wound healing. Eosinophils are involved in parasitic infections, so worm infections. They also can play a role in allergies. Mast cells are also known to play really big roles in allergies, in inflammation, in wound healing, and so they actually contain histamine. So if you take an antihistamine, that's to help reduce your allergic response. And so the allergic response largely comes from mast cells that release this histamine. You don't need to know all the details here, like containing receptors for IgE and all of that, but you should know generally what they're associated with. Okay. Monocytes and macrophages. They're widely distributed throughout the body. They, like I said, can phagocytose, so they can engulf the microbes and foreign particles, and they can either clear them themselves through those degradative enzymes, or they can present those antigens to the adaptive immune cells. So that's why we call them antigen presenting cells, or APCs. So these are a bridge between the innate and adaptive immunity. Remember, macrophages do this, and dendritic cells can do this. We're going to skip natural killer cells because this one's a little bit trickier, but just an idea that we have these natural killer cells that target cells that are not necessarily microbes, but they can target like some parasites, but also cancer cells. Okay, so the next topic that I want to talk about is this inflammation process and what leads to a fever response and things like that. I will stop here because I do want to pass back your exam. So I have it organized by lab section, so you can come up, and I guess we'll do 1, 2, and 3 over here.
Yes.
Section?
Lab. Sure, that's what I'm talking about. It's really good. Do you like sugar? Yeah. I have no idea. I can. They always have like all the flavors. But I think the BP is just like really I think that they don't It literally doesn't change.
Joanne, I didn't want. Oh, sorry. Yes.
I don't know if it was for sure.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. I want the new, did you see the Yeah.
I did see that, yeah.
I need to find it, I don't know.
3 Buster 1.
Yeah.
Are you at 1 p.m.? Yeah.
I feel like my B cells are failing me. I feel like they like took the week off or something.
Oh no.
It's just like that lingering, like the symptoms, like